Palmyra in the Syrian desert is a fascinating site located in the Syrian steppe desert between the river Euphrates to the east and the Mediterranean to the west. This site became, in the Roman period, the first 3 centuries CE, one of the hubs of the Roman world and beyond. It's also a very legendary site, known from sources even before it was rediscovered archaeologically by European travelers, known from sources most famously for its queen Zenobia, who reigned the city for 5 years on behalf of her young son, and also became the downfall of the city in that she provoked the Romans so much that the Emperor Aurelian took the city, sacked it immensely so that it never rose again to its heydays. We know quite little about Zenobia. She's described in the sources as being a beautiful woman with white teeth as pearls and a strong and manly voice, so she embodied everything that a female leader of a patriarchal society should have to actually make it grow. But she was only an intermezzo in a very long history of this fascinating site. Palmyra was rediscovered in different waves of travelers traveling in the region that we today call the Middle East. Most famously, the rediscovery of Palmyra can be described as having taken place with Dawkins and Woods in the 18th century, where they went on a big trip from England through Europe down to the Middle East and traveled around numerous sites in the Middle East and spent time in Palmyra, among other places. Their rediscovery of the site is embodied in this painting at Edinburgh National Gallery today, where they are displayed in Roman period togas, rediscovering the Orient, so to say. We doubt that they were really wearing togas when they rediscovered Palmyra, but this is very an orientalizing image of Western travelers rediscovering or meeting the East, so to say. Palmyra was deeply embedded in European culture also before the European rediscovery, namely through the sources, among others, the Historia Augusta. And actually, many European artists wrote books about Palmyra, did operas. Rossini did an opera that premiered on La Scala in the early 19th century. So the fascinating legend of Queen Zenobia and this desert site was something that fascinated Europeans for a long period of time. This was also the time when museum collections began to grow in Europe in general, and the portraits from Palmyra were one of these objects grouped that traveled into European collections in the 19th century onwards. Portrait habit in antiquity was a very, very central way of communicating identity, local identities combined with more global identities, and it was a very urban phenomenon in many ways. We know it from a lot of big cities, but Palmyra is really unique in the way that we have the largest corpus of portraits from the ancient world preserved from the oasis city in Palmyra over a period of 300 years. Funnily enough, we don't have any images of the well-known Queen Zenobia. All the statues that must have existed of her in antiquity have not been handed down to us today. But as said, she was only an intermezzo. What we do know about being a woman in Palmyra is that most likely women were veiled, as we see in the ritual processions. So when they were out in public, they wouldn't have displayed all the jewelry that they display in the fascinating funerary world, for example. And recently, books have come out on female portraiture in Palmyra, and also a very nice new monograph on Zenobia written by an American scholar, Nate Andrade. We all know today where Palmyra is in the Syrian desert, not least due to the conflict in Syria and the massive destructions that have taken place of the country and also of Palmyra since the start of the conflict. We've seen bombings of the famous grave towers, of the Temple of Baal, and there was also another reason that this site became a very contested site, namely the fact that it was the site where the Assad regime had the largest political underground prison. So Palmyra was actually not the place that you, as an active political opponent to the Syrian regime, would have liked to go. But Palmyra was also a very central location in antiquity. Situated in the middle of the Syrian steppe desert, it would have been the place where caravans naturally would have gone through, coming from east to west or the other side with goods that could have come as far away as China. We know that parts of the steppe desert were also agriculturally cultivated because there was much more water than normally set. So perennial wadis and springs and sources and wells were dug. So Palmyrene society actually held control of large parts of the desert, which was necessary in order to sustain their lives. Trade was, of course, extremely important for Palmyrenes also, and we see that reflected in the art of Palmyra. On this slide, you, among other things, see a man holding in one hand his ship, probably lying on the Arabian Gulf Coast. In the other hand, he holds a camel, really embodying the sorts of trade that Palmyrenes were involved in, namely the caravan trade and the seafaring trade as well. In that way, Palmyra came into contact with a lot of different cultures. And we see that heavily reflected in the art also, which on the one hand is very influenced by Eastern traditions of frontality schemes in art, and on the other hand, influenced by the Greco-Roman world, where even imported cult statues from Greece have been found. In the wall paintings of the grave, we also see Greco-Roman mythological themes reflected. So we really have to do with a cultural setting that used a string of different trends, religious, cultural, linguistic, over many, many centuries. Palmyrenes also served in the Roman army. They were very good archers, maybe the best in the Roman world. They served with the Emperor Trajan in his Dacian wars in the Balkans, and some of them even served in Roman Britain. So they came from afar and were an integrated part of the Roman Empire. The portraits from the graves are a fascinating group of material. A lot of them exist, and the research project that I have been heading since 2012 have collected more than 3,000 of these portraits and studied them over 300 years. These portraits come in all sorts of shapes and forms, and they were used in the graves where they covered burial niches and displayed the dead person to the world. In Denmark, we have one of the largest collections in the world, partly built up, or mostly built up actually, by the brewer Carl Jacobsen in the late 19th century. He was a very visionary collector and came across these portraits and bought several hundreds of them for his collection in Copenhagen. But he was also very visionary in the way that he even bought a Palmyrene mummy to be taken to the collection in Copenhagen. Unfortunately, it disintegrated on the road to Copenhagen, so we don't have it anymore. But he actually bought it because he wanted to keep it for the generations to come, because he was sure that techniques would be developed for us in order to actually compare whether real dead Palmyrenes looked as their funerary portraits. For a 19th century collector and brewer, that was a very visionary thought. In the later 19th century, Johannes Elith Østrup traveled to Palmyra and as one of the earliest Europeans mapped large parts of the Syrian desert, and he also did a long travel description describing the vandalism of the site that was already going on at this point in time. So we have to see the cultural heritage destructions in a very long-term perspective and know that changes of sites have been going on for centuries. Later, in the early 20th century, Harl Ingholt did fieldwork in Palmyra and added to the collection of the Glyptotek. He also studied the portraits in depth and found out how they stylistically fitted within the 300 years that they were produced. So it was really the rise in wealth and military power that made the portrait habit, as we call it, flourish in Palmyra in the first 3 centuries CE. The big, massive tower graves and the underground graves became large family galleries where people were displayed for generations and where, when you opened the door to the grave, you were confronted with generations and generations of your family. And these underground graves could be extended over generations at will and hold up to 400 burials. So the Palmyrene funerary portraits really depict family constellations. They are compressed images of snapshots of the family. So to say, the social media picture book of a nice day out in the forest. Often the graves display also sarcophagi scenes where you see a whole family lying and having a meal together, having fun on a Sunday, so to say. When we confront that with the evidence from the public sphere in Palmyra, the situation is quite different. We know that a lot of statues must have existed in antiquity, but they are lost to us today. Because the graves were closed, that's where the material survived, but outside in the open space, statues have been taken away, and all we are left with now is basically the monumental architecture of the public sphere, which reminds us of the rich cultural and architectural heritage that Palmyra must have had in antiquity. So the portraits in Palmyra that have now been collected really give us the opportunity to study phenomena in detail over 300 years. We can study dress culture, for example, study how men inscenated themselves as Greeks and Romans or as Parthian caravan leaders or religious leaders, because priests in Palmyra make up a distinctive group within the funerary corpus. We can also study jewelry trends over centuries, which give us insight into the globalism of Palmyra and the vast regions from which fashion trends influence the society on. We can study hairstyles and fashions, and that tells us a lot about what was important to Palmyrene women and society in general to display in the graves, namely the knowledge about the world around them and bringing that into their local societies. So the corpus of the funerary portraits give us a vivid insight into a society that was diverse but very locally based and who had their own unique traditions of how to display themselves in a very global world. And although you can say that this material might be quite nerdy to look at, it's actually the detail and the nerdiness and the possibility of studying all these thousands and thousands of portraits over 300 years that really gives us the key to understanding this fascinating desert city in the middle of the Syrian steppe desert.